On a quiet morning, a man was taken from his home in front of his family, placed in handcuffs, and accused of a crime he insisted he did not commit. The arrest was not based on eyewitness testimony. It was not based on DNA evidence. It was based on an algorithm. According to court filings and public records, law enforcement relied on facial recognition technology to identify him as a suspect. That identification would later be challenged, and the consequences would lead to a multi-million-dollar legal settlement. But here's the question. When artificial intelligence becomes part of policing, who is legally responsible when it gets it wrong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The increasing use of artificial intelligence in law enforcement is not theoretical. Over the past decade, police departments across the United States have adopted facial recognition software to assist in criminal investigations. These systems compare surveillance images to large databases of driver's license photos or booking records. The goal is to generate potential matches for investigators to review. According to official reports from civil liberties organizations and municipal records, several major cities integrated facial recognition tools into their investigative process during the 2010s. Proponents argue that the technology saves time and identifies suspects who might otherwise remain unknown. Critics, however, have raised concerns about accuracy, bias, and constitutional implications. One of the most widely documented cases involving an alleged wrongful arrest tied to facial recognition technology occurred in Detroit, Michigan. In 2020, a man named Robert Williams was arrested after police alleged that facial recognition software matched his driver's license photo to surveillance footage from a shoplifting incident. According to court documents and public statements made by the Detroit Police Department, the software produced what investigators described as a potential match. Detectives then presented a photo lineup to a store employee, who identified Williams. Williams was subsequently arrested at his home. He later stated publicly that he had never been to the store in question. According to reporting from multiple verified news outlets and statements made during subsequent legal proceedings, the surveillance image was low resolution. The American Civil Liberties Union filed a complaint on his behalf, arguing that the arrest relied heavily on unreliable technology. The lawsuit alleged violations of constitutional rights, including protections under the Fourth Amendment. The Detroit Police Department stated in response that facial recognition was used only as an investigative lead and that additional investigative steps were taken before the arrest. The department maintained that human review remained part of the process. The case ultimately resulted in a settlement. In 2023, the city of Detroit agreed to pay $300,000 to resolve Williams's lawsuit, according to official settlement records. This was not the only case. In 2021, another Detroit resident, Michael Oliver, filed suit after alleging that facial recognition software contributed to his wrongful arrest in a separate retail theft case. According to the complaint, he was arrested based on what was described as a mistaken identification. The city later settled that case as well, according to public reports. These incidents sparked broader debate about the reliability of facial recognition technology in criminal investigations. Studies conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, often referred to as NIST, have evaluated the accuracy of facial recognition algorithms. According to published NIST findings, some algorithms have demonstrated higher false positive rates when identifying individuals from certain demographic groups. Developers of these systems argue that accuracy has improved significantly over time, and that error rates vary depending on image quality and system design. The legal question, however, extends beyond technology performance. Under the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, individuals are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. An arrest must generally be supported by probable cause. Probable cause exists when officers have reasonably trustworthy information sufficient to warrant a prudent person in believing that the suspect has committed or is committing an offense. One interpretation raised in litigation is that reliance on flawed facial recognition software may undermine the probable cause determination if the underlying match is unreliable. Another perspective raised by law enforcement advocates is that facial recognition serves merely as a lead generator. Under this view, officers must independently corroborate the match before making an arrest, thereby preserving constitutional standards. Courts examining these cases have not issued sweeping rulings banning facial recognition. Instead, the legal disputes have often been resolved through settlements rather than appellate decisions establishing binding precedent. This distinction is important. Because many of these cases end in negotiated settlements, higher courts have had limited opportunity to establish definitive constitutional boundaries regarding AI-based identification in arrests. However, civil litigation has prompted policy changes. Following public scrutiny, the Detroit Police Department revised its facial recognition policies. According to official departmental statements, officers are now required to treat facial recognition matches strictly as investigative leads and must obtain additional evidence before seeking an arrest warrant. In addition, some jurisdictions across the United States have enacted local bans or restrictions on facial recognition technology. Cities such as San Francisco adopted ordinances limiting government use of such systems, citing privacy concerns. At the federal level, there is ongoing debate about regulation, though no comprehensive nationwide prohibition currently exists. The million-dollar question, legally speaking, is not whether AI can make mistakes. All investigative tools carry some margin of error. The question is whether the use of such tools satisfies constitutional standards when they directly contribute to depriving someone of liberty. In wrongful arrest claims tied to facial recognition, plaintiffs have typically alleged violations of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. This statute allows individuals to sue state actors for constitutional violations. To prevail, a plaintiff must show that the officer's conduct violated a constitutional right and that the right was clearly established at the time of the conduct. Qualified immunity often becomes a central issue in these cases. Qualified immunity protects government officials from personal liability unless they've violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. One interpretation is that if officers reasonably relied on technology believed to be accurate, qualified immunity may apply. Another interpretation suggests that blind reliance on unverified AI outputs, particularly where red flags are present, could undermine a claim of reasonableness. This is where factual nuance becomes critical. In the Williams case, attorneys argued that the surveillance image did not closely resemble their client and that additional investigative steps were insufficient. The city did not admit wrongdoing in the settlement agreement, which is common in civil resolutions. Settlements do not necessarily establish legal fault. They often reflect cost-benefit considerations, litigation risk, and public policy concerns. Still, the financial impact was real. Across multiple cases, payouts connected to alleged AI-based wrongful arrests have reached into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. When combined with legal fees and policy reforms, the total financial exposure has been significant. Beyond financial cost lies reputational impact. Law enforcement agencies adopting emerging technologies face scrutiny not only from courts, but from the public. Transparency regarding how AI systems are used has become a key issue. Some departments have declined to disclose vendor algorithms, citing proprietary protections. Civil liberties groups argue that lack of transparency makes it difficult to assess reliability and bias. From a constitutional standpoint, courts may eventually need to address whether algorithmic opacity affects the probable cause analysis. Is it reasonable to rely on a tool whose inner workings are not publicly examinable? There is not yet a definitive Supreme Court ruling directly on point. However, the court has addressed technology and privacy in other contexts. In Carpenter v. United States, for example, the Supreme Court held that accessing historical cell phone location records generally requires a warrant. The court recognized that advancing technology can alter privacy expectations under the Fourth Amendment. One perspective is that similar reasoning could eventually apply to biometric identification systems. Another view is that facial recognition merely automates traditional identification methods and therefore fits within existing doctrine. These debates remain active. For the individuals involved, however, the consequences were immediate and personal. Public arrest records, media coverage, and the emotional impact of detention cannot easily be quantified. Plaintiffs in these cases have described humiliation, stress, and damage to reputation. Such statements are contained in court filings and public interviews. Law enforcement officials, for their part, have emphasized public safety responsibilities and the need to investigate crimes efficiently. Balancing innovation with constitutional safeguards is not a simple task. And that brings us back to the central issue: accountability. If an officer relies on AI-generated identification, is the responsibility shared with the department, with the software vendor, with policymakers who approved its deployment? Courts have traditionally assessed officer conduct based on objective reasonableness, not technological complexity. But as artificial intelligence becomes more integrated into public decision-making, traditional legal frameworks may face new challenges. This discussion is for informational purposes only and not legal advice. In the coming years, appellate courts may provide clearer guidance. Legislatures may enact regulatory frameworks. Technology itself will likely evolve. For now, Documented cases demonstrate that AI-assisted policing carries both promise and risk. Given the facts, do you believe current constitutional standards are sufficient to address AI-based arrests, or should new legal safeguards be enacted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you value clear, fact-based legal analysis without exaggeration, subscribe for future breakdowns on constitutional law, policing, and the intersection of technology and civil rights.